Welcome. My name is Mathé Grenier, and I'm a director with the HayGroup, specializing in the area of leadership and talent, and it's my pleasure to be a speaker today for this IPAC talk. I'm sure you'll agree with me that leadership has the power to energize, engage, and motivate our people to go that extra mile. The real question is, what is it that effective leaders do to achieve that? Think of the leaders you admire. Take a moment. When you think about those leaders, everyone on your list reached you not only at an emotional level, they inspired you to tap into the very best of yourself, to deliver the most amazing work. And the important thing is that there is actually a predictable and measurable set of characteristics to what those leaders do to create that environment that fosters a high level of engagement and commitment to doing the right things to achieve the right results. They do this by embracing diversity. Most importantly, they're effective at flexibly tailoring their leadership style to suit the situation at hand. So let's go into what we'll be discussing over the next 25 minutes. First and foremost, I want to share with you the real ROI of effective leadership, because we know that effective leadership has a significant impact on performance outcomes, and there are clear causal links on how effective leaders do that. We're also going to talk about the specific leadership styles that great leaders use to get results, and how they do this in a way that embraces a diversity of style to match the situation at hand. And then finally, I want to share with you some insight and experiences in what does effective leadership look like when we talk about public sector leadership. Are there unique styles in different roles that have a different impact on organizational outcomes and on performance? Very quickly, want to share with you a little bit about the HayGroup for those of you who don't know about the HayGroup. We work with leaders in over 10,000 organizations around the globe. This has enabled us to collect data, to observe leadership, to define it, to measure it, and ultimately work with leaders in all of our client organizations to raise the bar of effectiveness so that leaders can achieve the results that your organizations require of them. We work with clients in a variety of different ways to structure organizations effectively to support your strategy, to define reward programs, to effectively motivate and ensure people are performing at their best. We design survey tools and assessments, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on in this presentation, to ensure that we have the benchmarks to measure those kinds of areas that really define effective leadership. So let's start with a view from the top. What is it that impacts leadership and the effectiveness of leadership? As public sector leaders, you face a tremendous number of challenges. And more than most other sectors, the complexity of these challenges are often unrelenting. Everything from fiscal constraints, cuts in public spending, increased public scrutiny in terms of what you're delivering and ensuring your outcomes meet the public's demands and expectations. Short-term political cycles that make it very difficult to make long-term investments and difficult to sustain. All of these challenges are things that leaders have to deal with on a daily basis and ensure that their teams are engaged and motivated to be driving towards the right kind of outcomes at the right time. And it's through effective leadership that this can happen. Leaders are the linchpin to address these kinds of issues effectively, to pave the way forward, to connect the dots so that people know what direction they're going in and what they need to do to be effective. All of this is very well said and is written in many different books and articles that I'm sure you've all engaged in many times. And yet the big question is often, how do you define and how do you elevate effective leadership? Fortunately, what we know is that leadership is not a black box. Leaders have a measurable impact on engagement, and performance. And effective leadership in organizations is one that you can actually measure to ensure that you're getting the kind of results that you're looking for. I'm sure you've all heard the expression, leaders set the tone. Did you know that, in fact, effective leadership has the power to impact up to 70% of the organizational outcomes and tone of the organization? And here's how it happens. What we know is that effective leaders drive results. The organizational outcomes that you as leaders are expected to deliver on is based on the kind of metrics that are used in the public sector. What we know is that up to 30% of those organizational outcomes are directly attributable to the kind of climate that you as leaders create for your teams in your organization. In fact, organizational climate in the public sector is probably the best proxy measure for financial metrics that you would see in the private sector. It has a huge impact in terms of the success, viability, and sustainability of the outcomes. So the big question is, how is it that effective leaders create a strong organizational climate? And what does that look like? Climate is really, when you think about it, what it feels like to work within your team, within your organization, for the leader you work with. It's a measure of the discretionary effort that I will give at work every day. And what we know is effective leaders create a climate that makes me want to give my all. How do they do that? They do that by demonstrating a flexibility of leadership styles. The most effective leaders, as we've measured through years of data and working with thousands of organizations, employ a diversity of styles in the right circumstances to drive the right kind of conditions for high performance. This, in turn, is determined by ourselves as leaders, our personal characteristics, our competencies, what we value, what motivates us, as well as the demands of the role. Because we know that the kind of outcomes that need to be driven in public sector environments are different than other sectors. So that role characteristics are critical to ensuring you're drawing on the right styles to lead to those right results. So given that, one of the things that we can really say based on research and experience is when we look at effective leadership, we know that a leader's behavior, the styles they use, is the single biggest factor to foster high performance and impact the discretionary effort of the people that work for you. Fortunately, we have the data to support those kinds of styles that do in fact have the impact. And there is a definite link. One of the reasons that leadership is somewhat of an enigma is that often we've been unable to define what it is that those effective leaders do. Fortunately, we have the research to demonstrate what those are. So when we look at effective leaders, those that use diversity in their style, we know that they're able to contextualize the approach they take to reflect the needs of their team, to reflect the needs of their organization, to reflect the needs of their constituents at any point in time. And what we've come to know is that there are 6 leadership styles that have the most direct impact on organizational performance and the working environment, hence the climate that's created in the working scenario. So let me ask you to imagine you've just walked into the office. It's 7:30 a.m. Monday morning. You sit down and you realize there's now 100 emails in your inbox. Your message light is blinking, and you have an important meeting at 8 a.m. You're first on the agenda. You sit down to gather your thoughts, plan your item on the agenda, and one of your direct reports arrives at your office, knocks on your door, and says, I need to talk to you. I have something very important I need to talk to you about. Do you have a minute? Imagine yourself in this situation. What do you do? How do you respond? What do you come up with? Well, this is a way that helps us to reflect on what our natural inclinations are and what we need to do as leaders to adapt to the situations flexibly. There's a number of different ways that we can affect our leadership style and the climate we create in organizations. How do you impact climate? Well, you can change the leader, or you can change the leader. And certainly one of those options is a lot more probably interesting and impactful and valuable for each of us. How do we change ourselves and our style and our approach in our leadership? One of the things to keep in mind is the kind of leadership styles. When you think about that scenario, that 7:30 a.m. when you're sitting down at your desk, how do you respond to your direct report? What's going on inside of you is driven by a lot of different things. It's driven by our own values, our own motivations, our own personality. The way we react and respond to those leadership situations is really also driven by the kind of environment we work in. What do other leaders do? What does the culture reinforce? What does my boss do, and how do I respond to my boss? What are acceptable norms of behavior? All of these things impact how I respond to certain situations as a leader and the kinds of leadership styles that I tend to resort to. What we know is that the most effective leaders are very aware of the context that they are in and are able to adapt their style despite some of the pressures that they may feel, despite the fact that the culture may demand certain other styles or reinforce certain styles, so that they can get the best results and create that positive climate. Let's look at what those styles are. I'm going to quickly go through the styles and tell you a little bit about how they work, when they're effective, when they're not. Because like any aspect of leadership, we know effective leadership is situational. We know that leaders are able to look at the situation they're in, assess what's necessary at that point in time, and use the style accordingly. One of those styles is what we call the directive style. It's a style that's all about immediate compliance. It's a command and control style. It's a tell you what you need to do and do it now, and I expect you to do it. You know, leaders who are very effective at setting smart objectives, holding people accountable to very specific outcomes and to-dos and methodology and procedure. The ability to give clear and direct guidance are all forms of the directive style used in a positive circumstance. The challenge with the directive style is that if it is overused, it can become very demotivating. Think of the styles being used, or leaders that have used the directive style, or when we've felt the need to use a directive style. Often it's in crisis situations. It's in situations where people must act a certain way. When there's a fire, you're told to leave, and you leave. The reality is, a lot of times we act as if there's a fire, when in fact it's not a fire. And so what happens is, when overused, the directive style is a bit like a sand wedge that's used around the golf course. A sand wedge is used in a particular crisis situation on a golf course, for those of you who are golfers, when you're in a tight spot, when you have to get out. However, when overused, it is really an awkward and sometimes very demoralizing style. You feel criticized and you feel challenged. The second style of leadership is a visionary style. This is the style that catches our attention, the style that we hear a lot about in terms of charismatic leadership, but more importantly, it's a style that enables the leader to be able to really define the purpose and the meaning behind why we're doing what we're doing and why we need to do it in this way and in this time frame. It's an ability to effectively communicate the why and the why it matters for our team, so that others can connect to that personally and connect to it from a purposeful manner. The challenge with the visionary style is it requires persistence and it must be compelling. What often happens is that a one-off use of a visionary style, the stand up on a quarterly basis at the quarterly meeting to set the direction, the monthly team meetings where I mention what we need to be doing isn't sufficient for the visionary style to have impact. The affiliative style. This is the style that's used to build rapport and a style that's used to really support employees in terms of relationship building and ensuring employees feel that they are valued and cared for as individuals. Again, like all the styles, there's a positive aspect and a dark side to the affiliative style. We know that the affiliative style has a very strong impact when people feel their leaders know them as people, when they feel connected. And that often is a very, very powerful means of transforming and transferring cultural norms in an organization. We also know that the dark side of a highly affiliative style overused is often one where managers and leaders are paying more attention to how employees feel than whether they're performing and producing. The next style, participative. This is the essence of what we call collaborative leadership, but it's more than working in a team environment. The participative leadership style is the ability for the leader to really seize and leverage the collective norms, the collective values and talents of their team. The leader that is confident enough to be able to realize that they don't have all the knowledge and expertise. The collective team is what brings that value and expertise to the table, and are very effective at ensuring that employees are able to contribute to their full value. Again, overused, like any style, can lead to a lot of discussion and not a lot of outcomes. There's a point in time when, for example, the participative style combined with the directive style can be very effective. The leader needs to call the shots. There's a point at which a decision needs to be made, and there's a time and place for that. The fifth style is what we call the pace-setting style. This is one that I have to admit, with my experience in coaching senior leaders, is probably one of the more overused styles in this day and age, certainly in the North American culture. The reason is that we find that if we're not setting the tone, if we're not raising the bar of performance, because we're the experts and that's what got me promoted to this role in the first place, I need to be out there on my white horse, charging forward and ensuring that everybody keeps up with me. There is certainly, again, an important place for the pace-setting style to take place. However, when it's just me at the front of the charge, I have to remember that occasionally I need to look back to make sure that people are actually following, because otherwise it can get pretty exhausting to be towing the line by myself. The final style is what we call the coaching style of leadership. This is the style that is putting the development of people at the forefront, ensuring people are building their strength and capability for the long term. The caution here is often as leaders, we intend to be using the coaching style when in fact it's experienced as directive. I have a boss, or may have a boss, that is very good at giving task-specific guidance, telling me exactly what to do and when to do it. In his or her mind, they sense that they're coaching me. What they're actually doing is micromanaging me, which is more of a directive style. So the coaching style is a challenging style to use, because when we have results to achieve, it's very difficult to be also thinking long-term in terms of the long-term capability of my individuals. It's also difficult to be consistently visionary when I've got short-term outcomes and very significant outcomes that I need to be contributing and producing. So what does this look like in terms of when we measure these styles and the impact of leadership? Here is an example of what an output of a leadership style survey would give you. What we know is that as leaders, and interestingly enough, our research would show that the more senior we are as leaders, the more inclined we are to overrate ourselves. In fact, believe that we demonstrate a lot of different styles and a good variety and diversity of styles, when in fact that's not necessarily how it's experienced by our direct reports. This is why feedback is so critical, and having that feedback from your direct reports that's telling you what you intend, is it what you actually, what they actually experience? So on the left of this slide, You've got the you've got what the individual leader would have self-reported of the kind of styles they demonstrate. Contrast that with on the right, which is what's actually experienced by their direct reports. So you've got a leader who believes they're demonstrating a variety of styles, when in fact what they're experiencing is a leader that demonstrates primarily a directive and pace-setting combination of styles. What we know from research is that most effective leaders who create that climate of high performance are the leaders who demonstrate at least 3 to 4 styles as dominant styles that their direct reports experience on a regular basis, and 1 or 2 backup styles. And this is the challenge for us as leaders in terms of ensuring that we're creating that climate of success. And what we found, interestingly enough, through our research, is that the majority of leaders, unless they're aware of their impact, tend to demonstrate and resort to 1 or 2 dominant styles with their teams. So the challenge is to be aware of the kind of leadership styles that are required in the situation and be able to flex your approach to meet the needs despite the pressure and the challenges that you feel. A couple of last items that I wanted to share with you is, what does this look like in the public sector? So one of the things we did is we compiled over the last couple of months results of leadership style inventories from public sector leaders across Canada. So this particular data shows about 1,300 leaders who have been through this survey and illustrates a little bit about the differences in what you tend to experience in public sector leadership. And while I go through this, I challenge you to reflect, what do you think are the dominant styles that we see in public sector leadership today? In fact, historically, years gone by, a lot of people would have said, the participative leadership style is the one we see most of. This desire to get everybody involved in discussions and decision-making, making sure everybody feels valued. Whereas probably because of the increasing scrutiny, the unrelenting pressures, what we're seeing is actually much more use of the directive and pace-setting styles as dominant styles. And in fact, a real decline, interestingly enough, in the visionary and coaching styles. That leaders at all levels are not spending the time or really being intentional about the purpose behind why their team is doing what they're doing and the value of public sector leadership and the value of public sector work. Another way that we show what this, the impact of leadership in different roles is that there are different kinds of leadership roles. And what the kind of leaders who are involved in policy and planning, for example, on the left, compared to those leaders that are involved in direct delivery and operations, require different kind of leadership styles to be effective, because your roles, in fact, have different expectations. And so what we found is that those of you who are more in policy and planning roles, because you don't have direct accountability for outcomes, the need to be visionary, the need to ensure you're getting stakeholder engagement using a participative style are critical. Those of you in more of the matrix collaborative roles, where you're working across boundaries, you can appreciate the participative style being critical there as well. Whereas direct operations and delivery, the visionary and coaching styles become most critical. So in conclusion, a lot of valuable information shared here. I just want to close off with 3 key thoughts. First and foremost, effective leadership impacts outcomes. There's a clear causal link, and there is a measure that we can have in terms of what effective leaders do, in terms of styles that they demonstrate, to create a climate of high performance. And we can measure that climate of high performance through an organizational climate assessment as well. Secondly, diversity of leadership matters. Intuitively, this makes sense to all of us, but in practice, it's very difficult to do tailoring your style in the moment to suit the requirements of the situation, to create that climate of high performance given the contents that I'm working in, is very, very challenging and requires feedback and ongoing practice for us as leaders. And finally, one of the key pieces to keep in mind is that a role is not a role is not a role. What that means is different leadership roles have different expectations and as a result, different styles. Those of you who have moved laterally across boundaries in different kind of leadership roles over the course of your career will really be able to reflect back and say, the kind of styles I used in this kind of role, and when I moved over to that kind of role, I really had to flex a different kind of leadership style. So not only understanding what I bring to the table in terms of my natural inclinations, the kind of situation I'm leading in, the people that work for me, but also the type of role I'm in plays a very important factor in terms of my effectiveness as a leader. And I want to end with a quote from one of our key clients that looked at, suggesting that leveraging leadership styles can lead up to 30% of impact on outcome and discretionary effort. You may think 30% isn't a lot, but quite frankly, even if we were wrong by half, 15% is too large a figure when you think about the direct impact leaders have on outputs to not pay attention to your leadership styles. Thank you.